Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Welcome to today's Ausfilm webinar. My name is Kate Marks and I'm the CEO of Ausfilm. As we're hosting this morning's session from Australia, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather. For me, that is the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. So look, many of you would have seen the news that on the 9th of May this year, the Australian government announced the location offset will increase from 16.5% to 30%. And I know that if we're all together in a room right now, I'd be hearing lots of cheering. This is huge for the Australian industry and comes after more than a decade of advocating by Ausfilm and many others in the industry, both locally and internationally. It will provide you all with the ongoing certainty that you need to bring your productions to Australia now and into the future, and to further enhance the many wonderful partnerships you have with screen businesses and practitioners right across the country, many of whom are Ausfilm members. It will encourage new investments into infrastructure and new partnerships into training to further enhance and continue to develop the best crew possible and the best facilities here in Australia. Importantly, the location offset will now align with the post-production digital and visual effects offset, the PDV offset, meaning that you will receive a consistent 30% from the very start of production right through to delivery. Our talented cast, crew, government agencies and screen businesses are here to support your productions and to help you bring them to life in Australia. Look, Ausfilm is super excited about this announcement, and we're deeply appreciative of the support and leadership of the Australian government and the commitment they've made to ensuring Australia is a competitive filmmaking location for you all. We're also incredibly fortunate to have the support of the Office for the Arts, and we have them here today to take you through the detail. So please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, ask your questions whenever, and we'll ask them at the end of the presentation. And so it's now my pleasure to introduce you to Bec Rush. Many of you had the opportunity to meet Bec during Ausfilm Week in Los Angeles last October, but Bec, for those who didn't, is the Assistant Secretary, Australian Screen Industries with the Office for the Arts with the Australian Government. So my pleasure to welcome you to the screen, Bec.
Thank you for that introduction, Kate. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. My name is Bec Rush. I am joining you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, also known as Canberra, Australia's capital. As Kate mentioned, there was an announcement in May in the budget context confirming that the location offset will be increased to 30%. I'm not going to talk for too long because you'll want to hear from my colleagues Jason Potkins and Kendall Clayton on the detail, but just wanting to flag with you that this was committed to in this document called Revive, which is the government's cultural policy. Do yourself a favour, as Molly Meldrum would say, and get yourself a copy. This was launched in January. And it was in this document that the government committed to ongoing support for large-scale production and attracting that production from offshore. So this is a cultural policy commitment, but is also a trade policy commitment. And I would be remiss not to acknowledge the work and advocacy of my colleagues from Austrade. But in truth, as Kate said, this is the result of years of work and data collection around the benefits of offshore production to the Australian screen production sector, but also to the economy more generally. These are things that are well known, but worth repeating in this context. I'd like to acknowledge the work of Ausfilm, my team, but also my predecessors who will be well known to you, and Carolyn Fulton and Joe Sharp. I'd also like to, before I hand over to my colleagues, to acknowledge that this means that we will need to continue to look at the capacity issues in the sector. That is making sure that we continue to have the best and the brightest above and below the line to support you in when you come to Australia. And I think that I've had a quick look at my team's presentation, and they will be talking you through some of the ways that we will leverage the offset to make sure that you come to our shores and continue to work with, not that I'm biased, but the best in the world. On that note, I will throw to my colleagues, Jason Potkins, who is the Director of the Screen Industries team, and Kenny, the Assistant Director. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Potkins. As Becca said, I am the Director of the Screen Incentives section here in Canberra. Essentially, we are responsible for all screen production policy and the film tax offsets, as well as the location incentive program, which many of you may be familiar with. And it's our job to take you through the detail today, but also joining me is Kendall as well.
Hello, nice to see you all. I'm Kendall. I'm the Assistant Director in the Screen Incentives section, and I work with Jason.
So without any further delay, we'll just get into the details. So on the screen is an overview of the current screen production incentives that we have here. So you have the location offset, which as announced in the budget, from July 2023 will be increased to 30%. The current rate, of course, is 16.5%. The other offset we have is the post-digital and visual effects offset. That's currently at 30%. And then we have the two rates for our producer offset, which has a cultural test and the significant Australian content test. And that's 40% for feature films and 30% for other. Next slide. So we're going to kind of walk through some main changes. So as I've just outlined, and as everybody has outlined, we are increasing the location offset rate from 16.5% to 30%. The minimum expenditure thresholds are also changing. So the minimum qualifying Australian production expenditure is increasing from 15 million and 1 million per hour to 20 million and 1.5 million per hour. There's also a couple of new eligibility requirements, and that people who have been through the location incentive program will be familiar with these. First of all, there will be a commitment to training and capacity building, and that's to alleviate some of the capacity issues that Bec mentioned previously. There's also a requirement to work with one or more of our Australian post-digital or VFX companies here in Australia. And also, we'll be introducing some statistical requirements and reporting requirements at the application stage, so we can capture some data about the effect of the offset on employment and other aspects. Just to make it very clear up front, the offset is uncapped and unlimited, so all you have to do is meet those minimum expenditure requirements. There's no longer a requirement, as there is under the location incentive program, to secure state support before commencing your production to access the offset. And you don't have to be footloose. That is, you don't have to be not locked into Australia, so you can be locked into Australia. Next slide, please. So the changes will be made to amendments to our legislation, the Tax Act. That is actually, the Tax Acts are the responsibility of the Treasurer and the Treasury Department. Unfortunately, we can't give you any timeframes of when that legislation will pass. But as we've said, it will commence from 1 July 2023. The changes will be applied retrospectively. So whenever the legislation passes, it will still start from that date. Also, I think we would kind of make it clear to people that the absolute end date that we would want to see the legislation passed by is the end of next financial year in Australia, which is 30 June 2024. The reason for that is if we travel over financial years, the tax arrangements can get quite complicated. So the absolute end date will be 30 June, but I think we would probably hope to see legislation introduced in the third or fourth quarter this year, with passage either late this year or early next year. Next slide, please. So as Bec and Kay mentioned, the objective of the location offset is to encourage large-scale screen production. That's another reason why we've increased our minimum expenditure thresholds. And really, what we're trying to do is encourage the long-term growth in the sector. in the past, Australia has offered ad hoc funding. We've recently had the location incentive program, which was both capped and time limited. But this now, with the location offset increase, means that we now have an opportunity to kind of secure a long-term pipeline of productions into the future. And it means that hopefully studios and production companies can start planning in the long term rather than in the kind of production by production basis as well. Next slide, please. So we will obviously keep as many people as we possibly can updated on the eligibility requirements as we go through the process. We'll start informal consultation on several of the new eligibility requirements in the next few weeks. Particularly, we'll be focusing on the new training requirement. That is obviously something that we're very keen to get right and to get your views on. So informally, we'll be reaching out to people, and then there will be a formal consultation process once the legislation is actually introduced into the Parliament as well. Next slide, please. So if you commence principal photography before 1 July 2023 or before up until 30 June 2023, you can still claim the location offset at 16.5%. If you commence principal photography after 1 July 2023, then you will be captured by the new offset rate and the new eligibility requirements under that offset. Next slide. If you commence your production after 1 July 2023, you will only be eligible for the new offset rate. Okay, so basically the date when you commence principal photography or manipulation of the moving image essentially determines when you will be, which rate you will be captured by. Next slide, please. So pre-production costs will be covered by the new offset rate. So if you commence principal photography after 1 July, your pre-production costs will be captured under that new 30% rate. So it's the entire production process will be covered. Next slide, please. So if you want to apply for a provisional certificate before the legislation is passed, and if you want that to reflect the 30% rate, at the moment, until legislation passed, that is not possible. But you should reach out to us to discuss what options are and what the new changes will be so that we can kind of walk you through the process. But at this point in time, we can only issue provisional certificates based on the legislation as it stands. Next slide, please. We don't anticipate that a production company will be able to go through pre-production, post-production, and pre-production, principal photography, and post-production before the legislation actually comes into effect, given that our end date is 30 June 2024. If you think that could actually apply to your production, though, then please, you should reach out to us and we can discuss some options there as well. Next slide. Once the legislation is passed and once it's actually into effect, then we will very quickly update our relevant guidelines, our application forms and other areas to reflect the new changes. But unfortunately, we can't anticipate what Parliament might do with the legislation, so we can't finalize those right at this time. But yeah, as we make changes, we'll obviously keep people informed as soon as we possibly can. Next slide, please. So your location, the increase of the location offset won't increase your, won't affect your location incentive application. So if you have applied for the location incentive and are receiving funding under the location incentive program and commenced principal photography before 30 June 2023, there will be no changes to the process whatsoever. You will still continue to be covered by that scheme and get payments under that scheme. If you've applied for the location incentive, have been committed funding, but won't commence principal photography till after 1 July 2023, then you should contact us and we can walk you through the options there. And of course, If you've applied but haven't received an offer or haven't received any commitment of funding and are commencing principal photography after 1 July 2023, then you will be covered by the new location offset rate. Next slide, please. If you've already received a location and grant, location incentive grant, then as I said, the changes won't affect you whatsoever. It's only going to affect you if your principal photography commencement date is after 1 July 2023. Next. So you can't complain. Unfortunately, you can't claim the location incentive and the location offset at the increased rate. Basically, we will prohibit you from claiming anything more than 30%. But certainly, look, again, it's the date that your principal photography commences that determines at what rate you will apply, and the mix between the location incentive and the location offset. And again, if you've recently applied for the location incentive and then know that quite a few people have, then please reach out to us. We've probably already contacted you, but if we haven't, or if you haven't heard from us, or if you're not clear about the process, then please reach out. Next slide. That's it.
Thank you, Jason and Kendall. That takes us through the formal presentation. Again, I encourage people to submit any questions they have. Now is the time. Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And I guess just to point out, we recognise that there is a period of transition between where we're at now with both the offset at 16.5% and also the location incentive through legislation process. So we recognise that there is a transition that we'll all need to sort of work with, but I just reiterate to speak to Jason and his team, or of course speak to Erin and the Ausfilm team to help guide you through that process. But we know that a lot of the new eligibility requirements are what people have been already doing with the location incentive grant. It will become more straightforward and streamlined. The purpose, one of the key reasons we've been wanting the location offset rather than incentive is to make it easier for you, for it to be a very streamlined, simple process. Many of you have been working with the location offset for probably close to 20 years. And we know that that process itself is simple, it's straightforward, it's certain. So what we're working towards is having the offset at 30% working in a very similar manner. Okay, Jason and Kendall, I'm going to start throwing you some questions. I have a question about that transition, so that's a good starting point. So during the transition, are there any specifics around the give back for training? So how do people, while we don't have legislation in place, how do clients know what to kind of work towards in that training piece?
Look, there's no specifics yet. As I said, we are going to go out to consultation around the training element, and that will probably give you an idea of what our thinking is. We're trying to incentivize long-term training rather than, kind of specific production by production training. But, there's ways and means of doing that. But certainly at this point in time, we've got no specific details. I would probably say is that if you've done training under the location incentive previously, then the outcome will probably be very similar to that. So, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're just trying to make sure that that training kind of that's been happening is continued into the long term.
Thanks, Jason. Another question on that training is, should applicants be looking to budget differently when they're to accommodate that training? So should they look at including a number of trainees, any particular number, whether it's 4 or 5 or more? Is there a way, any guidance you can give?
So we can't give specific guidance. Look, we are looking at maybe a minimum expenditure requirement on training. The reason for that is really just to try and kind of quantify the minimum amount that we would expect. There's 2 aspects there. First of all, we want to make it very, very transparent and very clear to people before they start production in Australia exactly what the requirement is, so they can be absolutely certain that they will meet the requirement before they start. And the second aspect is we can't make the training requirements so onerous that it actually distracts from the attraction of the offset. So essentially, we're trying to kind of get a middle ground where we get long-term training for the sector to relieve that capacity, but at the same time mean that productions can meet it relatively easily.
Thanks.
I would just encourage people to reach out and actually talk to us direct, and we can kind of walk you through where we're thinking as well.
Great. On another question on the new eligibility requirements. So what are the specifics around the requirement for a production to use one or more Australian provider in terms of PDV?
So there's no real specifics. I mean, anybody who's gone through the location incentive program had this requirement put on them as part of the program. And really what we're looking at is that you just use one or more PDV production house in Australia. We're not looking at expenditure thresholds or minimum requirements at this point in time. And the reason for that is really is a little problematic. You know, it's easy for a large VFX heavy company or film to actually meet an expenditure requirement for PDV. But for a drama, for example, which is mid-budget, they might have a very low budget for that. So really, we're not looking at the expenditure thresholds at the moment, but that's something we'll obviously continue to review in terms of what the outcomes are into the future.
And I could just add there that obviously at 30% now, we are encouraging you to do as much of your post-production and visual effects work in Australia. So don't just think of visual effects, think of the full gamut of your picture, sound and music post, because you will get 30%, as I said, from your very start to delivery. So you are encouraged to do as much and reach out to Erin to talk you through all our wonderful post-production Ausfilm members. Just a little plug for them, if I can add that in. Okay, let me look at more questions. Are there any changes to, again, we did touch on this, but some people may have come in late. So both any changes to the threshold, the spend threshold, or any caps on any specific expenditure?
So as I outlined, the minimum expenditure thresholds are increasing from 15 and 1 million per hour. Sorry, so $15 million and 1 million per hour to $20 million and 1.5 million per hour. So that is the minimum expenditure thresholds. There is no cap and there is no limit on the amount of funds available under the location offset. It is uncapped and it's unlimited, and obviously there's that aspect.
Thank you. There's a question here, is there a plan to allow users of the location offset to also access the PDV offset? So
short answer is no. All of the offsets are mutually exclusive, so you can only choose one. But obviously with the location offset, as you've just outlined, you can cover all of your pre-production, principal photography and post-production costs, the whole production process under the location offset. Similar as you can do under the producer offset if you meet the relevant Australian content tests. So no, we won't allow people to access both, but the whole process will be covered.
Thank you. I have a question about the other offsets. Are there any changes to the post-production offset or the producer offset through this recent announcements?
No. So no, none at all. Those are being kept separate. This is purely to ensure the long-term continuity of international production and large-scale production in Australia.
Thank you. And I think, look, again, you touched on this during the presentation, but for those who may have come in late, there's two questions around some of the eligibility that might not be there anymore. Both, will you still need to be footloose to come in for the offset?
No, you don't need to be footloose, so you can be locked into production. So essentially, the footloose requirement was brought in as part of the location incentive program. It's never applied to the location offset. So we are essentially just carrying on the location offset rule in that regard.
Right. And that also therefore is the same for the question around the state government support. You will no longer need to get state government support prior to being eligible, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, when we moved to the 30%, we knew that state government support, although it's very important and can be very beneficial for companies coming in, it can be subject to, just as the location incentive program was, to decisions by administrators, limited amount of fundings, those kind of aspects. So we wanted to make sure that the offset was standalone and attractive to companies to bring them in, irrespective of what was happening with state support.
Great. And this might be the final question, unless others are coming in, but we've just made it clear that you don't need state incentive to be eligible, but can you still get state incentives on top of the federal offset? So whether it's a production attraction grant from a state or a specific state top-up PDV.
Yes, you can, and that will be in addition to the 30% that you get under the location offset. So we're not stopping anybody going for state support. It's just that you don't need it as an eligibility requirement under the new location offset rate.
Right. So we recommend that you all continue to talk to the relevant state screen agencies as well as us about what might be available, some of which are particularly those PDV offsets around the country are quite specific in what they get, up to 10 to 15%. And then the production attraction ones, if you're looking to shoot, you really do have a conversation with your state screen agency to look at what that negotiated incentive may be. I'm just going to have a quick look through all the questions to make sure we've answered most. I think a couple of these we talked about through the presentation. So I think that is it. If there's this is your last chance to put in an a question or two, not an application quite yet.
Not yet.
Not yet, but okay, well, that is your questions answered. I do again recommend that you, in the very first instance, reach out to Erin and Simon, who just started with us this week in LA, and Vivian is there, and the Ausfilm team in Sydney, of course, and Jason and his team at the Office of the Arts, as well as the state. So as you know, there's always a number of avenues for you to talk to us across the country to really support your production. We're here to help. We know there's a transition that we need to go through, but we really think this is a game changer for our industry. And as I said before, it's something we have been working towards for many, many years. And I do want to thank all of you for your ongoing support through this process. You've all participated in one way or another in getting us here. So as I said, we're super excited. We're looking forward to seeing all your productions come down, not just now, but really into the future. And that's what's going to make a difference to us here, and the opportunities for us to really collaborate closely and further enhance the wonderful relationships that we all have with you. So thank you. Thank you for all your support over the years. We look forward to ongoing, and a particular thank you to Jason and to Kendall and the team. They have been working tirelessly behind the scenes to get us to this point. And I know they'll continue to work tirelessly to get us through the legislation and to get you all the details that you need to start putting in those applications. So thank you very much for today.
Thank you.